Have you ever done something well-intentioned that turned up to be the wrong thing? Katie, why are you laughing at him? So I had one of our members come up to me after the service this morning, said, I got in trouble for buying my wife flowers. Wow. I mean, he said, I didn't get her roses. Well, okay. He said, I got her flowers. And, what was he said, I got her some mums. Well, okay, that's not the most expensive ones, but whatever. If they were pretty, what's the point? He said, when she was a little girl, they hosted had something to do with a death in the family or the community. And the flowers that came to the house were mums. And from that day on, she has had this thing about mums. Those are flowers for dead people. And he said, I meant well, and I got in trouble. I said, I bet you never did that again, did you? He said, well, actually, and guys, only the husbands in here will understand this. He said, she found a type of mum that she likes. It's a flower. Guys are going, yeah, I understand that. But we've been, Carla and I will have been married 28 years this year. And she is a patient soul. There's no doubt. But, I thought I was doing, it's been since we were here in, where are we? In Boiling Springs. I had to go through the towns in my head. You know that? Which town are we in? Anyway, I thought I was doing something nice. For years and years and years, Carla has always, she's made brownies. How big a deal is this? It's not rocket science, right? So I decided I'm going to be nice, and just as a small token of, love, appreciation, all that other fun stuff, I made a pan of brownies. They weren't Judy Coleman brownies. No, if you haven't, some of y'all are going, huh? All right, I think that for Christmas you need to make a pan of brownies for every family in the church. Okay? I think that. Trust me, you will thank me. Anyway, I don't know, Duncan Hines, Betty Crocker, doesn't matter. So I make this pan of brownies, and I am met with this face of stone. All those years, you know what I didn't know? Carla doesn't like brownies. How many hundreds of pans of brownies has she made in our married life? And they always disappear. I just assumed that she was helping. You try to do something nice, and it doesn't always work, And sometimes, so it would be real easy to say, man, nothing I do is right. You ever heard that? Nothing I do is right. I try. Maybe you've heard something more along these lines. Can't you do anything right? Yeah, that was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. That was so stupid. What are you thinking? You ever heard those words coming from somebody? Let me tell you, if you've heard those words, chances are those words are coming from a place of pain, and probably coming from some scars, and probably coming from someone else's experience. You see, you're hearing the words when you hear those painful words. You hear the words of a self-blamer. This is what a self-blamer looks like. You might be a self-blamer if you think constantly about your failure, stupidity, or sinfulness. Wow. You might be a self-blamer if you always seem to mess things up just like you knew you would. You might be a self-blamer if you see yourself as a lost cause. Or, as far as you're concerned, everyone else, I love that word, everyone's doing it. Everyone else is smarter, more godly, or more disciplined than you. You believe that God is mad, disappointed, or disgusted with you. You might be a self-blamer if guilt is your constant companion. Wow. Painful, isn't it? I can look at some of your faces and see that some of that is hitting home. And it's meant to. I mean, because I want you to hear this. You know, we've talked, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about avoiders. Last week, we talked about deflectors. The self-blamer is the one that bears it all. When we were dating, now I've told y'all before, my mother did not want me to marry Carla. Oh, she had somebody else, and, whatever, Mom. And one of the things that she told Carla about me early on, was you just don't know him. He will say things to hurt you. You know what? Mom was dead on the target. She was. She was absolutely, man, you could not have zeroed a target any more tightly than that. Because guess how I learned how to fight? And guess who I learned how to fight from? You see, fighting is not, when you think about it, there's discussing things, and that's where two rational adult minds sit down and they have a conversation. You don't always have to agree, married or not. You don't have to always agree on something. You can come to a place of disagreement. A fight is where you do what? Where you have to what? Do what? You have to win in a fight. And that's how I learned how to fight. Guess who I learned it from? Mom and Dad. And I can take that pattern of my fighting and that need to win, and I can easily go back, piece by piece. I can go back 2 generations easily. I can go back to both my dad's mom and my mom's mom. And that's not meaning me to pick on moms by any means. But I can carry it back at least 2 generations. I want to say this to every mother, father, grandparent, aunt, uncle, adult in this room. I want you to listen to me for a second. When you have a disagreement and you need to have that tough conversation, I want you to remember that you are programming the next 2 generations. Think about that. When you go head to head with each other and you have that knockdown, drag out, throw down, you know the ones I'm talking about? Now some of y'all don't do that. I understand some of y'all act like adults. Okay? When I get a little too wound up and I'm trying to tie into it, I'm glad I got Carla, because she won't fight. She just cries. It's not fair. Okay? But you know the one I'm talking about. If you are doing that and you've got to have that, get in the car and hire a babysitter and go for a drive. Get out of the house, leave your kids out of it, and don't think just because you've closed the bedroom door that they can't hear you. Okay? Make sense? Because you're programming the next generations. They learn how to fight, how to disagree, how to get along. They learn that from you. They learn that from you. Now, I'm not trying to pile on right here. I'm really not, but I think that's an important word for you to hear, and I think probably an important one for all of us to hear on a regular basis. Now, where does all this crud come from? As I was getting ready for this sermon, I was going over some of this with Carla, and I was talking about some of these things that you might be a self-blamer if. And that list we just read, and Carla's sitting on the end of the couch, and I'm sitting in my chair, and I said, "Who does that sound like?" And she looked at me and she said, "You." Ow. So I understand where this is coming from. I understand very, very well where this is coming from. You might be a self-blamer. Let's talk about some of the things that self-blamers say. I have no idea why you love me. And truthfully, they mean that because they don't see themselves as how anybody could love them, because everything is their fault. In their spirit, everything is their fault. I can't do anything right. I can't do anything right. Does this sound familiar? Is this scratching and poking close to home for anybody? God must think I'm an idiot. I should have known it wouldn't succeed. I knew it was too good to be true. And what's it all about anyway? Who cares? What do I care? You see, we've built up a burden that we try to carry on our own. We know we cannot succeed. That's what happens in here. And unfortunately, it's also what happens here in our hearts. We know we cannot succeed. We're never going to be good enough. We're never going to be able to do these things. When we were in our church in Kingsport, we rented out the city park pool area, and I know the pool was much bigger than the gym. I mean, the thing was huge. I mean, it was, part of it was a diving area, and part of it was competitive swimming area, and there was a recreation area. The thing was just massive. And it's back before when insurance companies used to still allow diving boards. You remember the good diving boards? The ones that would spring almost down to the water before they would just send you up like a rocket. And I mean, the insurance company, people got hurt on them. Some people would spring and then they would land on the board, But those were, they were great. And so, but anyway, they had this high dive. Not the platform, the one that's about 1,000 feet in the air, but but it was, the tall diving board. And this young lady got in line after she was watching these people, and they were, how it gets, the kids and the teenagers, and they go off, and some of them can really do fancy stuff, and they're showing off, and other ones just, hey, watch me do a belly flop from 30 feet in the air, Yeah, you go. But there was one thing in common. They would come off the board, they would come up, they'd swim to the ladder, they'd get out, and they'd go get in line again. And so this young lady did just that. She got in line, and got to the top of the ladder, walked out to the end of that diving board, and looked over for the very first time and froze. Just not good. And you can see, you know how the ladder gets. People are on the ladder. There's 3 or 4, only one on the ladder at a time. Yeah, right. And so there's people on the ladder. You got this young lady on the end of the diving board, and she just freezes, and she walks to the back, and she walks out, and she walks to the back, and she walks out, and she walks to the back, and she walks out. And just, come on, you can do it, come on, go, I wish you'd hurry up and go, somebody get her off of there, just over and over. And finally, she gets out to the end, and she finds her courage, and she jumps, she just leaps out. And nothing graceful about it, just going into the water for the first time, comes up spitting and sputtering with a massive smile, over to the ladder, out, back in line. Again and again and again. One of the last ones we could get out of the park that night. There was something inside that young lady that said, I can't. I'm not able. It's going to fail. It won't work. Not me. And through the cheers of the community, that young lady found her courage. And she stepped off, and it was a non-issue from then. It was a non-issue from then. You and I hold ourselves to the wrong standard. You know why? And this is, I pray this when I pray for us as a church, but I want you to hear, you and I do not hold each other or ourselves to the standard that God set for us. And you would think that standard would be way up here. You and I hold ourselves to the wrong standard. You see, we hold ourselves to the standard that the world sets for us. This is the same scripture we just read, and I want you to hear these words again. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Do you catch that? By human standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. In other words, you weren't from the right families. Gosh, we don't have royalty in our country, but we really do, don't we? You have the families that have controlled communities, or the popular people, or the landed people. We've had that for years and years. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are. Let me tell you, for the self-blamers in the room, let me tell you where that comes from. You see, you have been, I'm just going to use the word branded because a brand is permanent. You have been branded by a form of misuse, maybe a form of abuse. For some of you, it happened as children. For many of you that are wrestling with this, it probably happened as children. Somebody told you that you were not good enough, you were not strong enough, you were not smart enough, you were not fast enough, you were not, you hear it. This always amazes me. When you've got teams of kids, and I've heard this in elementary school, and you get the parents. How serious do parents take Little League Baseball? Wow. And let me tell you, I was one of them. I was one of the coaches. I think Ryan was, I don't think it was T-ball, maybe coach's pitch the year after that. Almost got thrown out for getting a little too carried away over a call. Seriously, got way too serious with this. Yeah, I can see. You go, bud. Yeah. We won't talk about Carla getting thrown out of the press box. It's another story for another day. But have you ever heard this? Get him off the field. Talking about somebody else's kid. They're not good enough to be, they're hurting the team. And those words came, or you hear this, even from the parents on the opposing team. Oh, great, he's going to strike out. He always strikes out. Or he can't pitch, he can't catch, he can't throw, he can't, whatever. And they pretend that the kids can't hear those words. They think they're encouraging their own team, and they're branding the other team. If you've got a kid in those, whether you're the grandparent, if you hear somebody in front of you say that about somebody else's kid, I hope you'll slap them upside the head. Isn't that a gracious way to be? Certainly a Christian response, isn't it? You and I have been branded by other people's actions, other people's words, sometimes other people's threats. Some of it was just verbal or emotional abuse. And I would say in a loose or a broad sense, that's certainly where my dings come from, where my dents come from. And that's my personal story. Others, it's physical abuse. There is, Howard, would you do a favor for me? Would you step in the kitchen and ask them either to close the door or to tone it down, please, sir? Thank you. Sometimes it's physical. Let me say this. There is never an excuse. I understand. I was one. Carla and I were not afraid to pop a little kid's rear end. We were not afraid of that. But you know the difference between a quick pop or a small spanking and abuse. Some of you that are in education have seen it. You've seen the results of it. And it is sinful. It is illegal. It is illegal, and I hope that if you see it in your neighborhood, in your home, in your family, in your school, listen, I pray, I beg you to step in. No child should ever be subject to physical abuse, period. End of story. The church will not stand for it, and if the church, being the church, as the pastor or those that are on staff here, we're mandatory reporters. If we see it, we have no choice. Teachers in the public school system are mandatory reporters. Those that work in the preschools in the community are mandatory reporters. Unfortunately, too often it gets buried, it gets swept. If you hear of physical abuse, let me say this: if you're here and you know an adult, whether it is a spouse, whether it is a member of your family, no, I don't care who it is, how old they are, no one should be subjected to physical abuse at any stage in their life. You know what it is, and if you know of it, I hope you will deal with it immediately. But those physical scars, whether they are seen or not, that physical abuse leaves scars. And then there's the worst case, I believe, and that's sexual abuse. Sexual abuse does not always have to have flesh-to-flesh contact for it to occur. If you know of it, you see it, you hear of it, I hope that you will go off like a rocket. I beg you to respond. Because these are the kind of scars that people bear that create the self-blamers. And it is scars that carry on for generations. And I can promise you, until you are willing to wrestle with it and say, that is not who God calls me to be, you will forever be a self-blamer. Here are some of the things that self-blamers do. They give up because they've been banged on and hurt and poked at and prodded so long, they just give up. Then they live in self-pity because they know they cannot succeed. They can't do it. They attract saviors. So we're going to talk about saviors down the road. The saviors are the ones, some of you are saviors. You like to swoop in and fix things. Well, we're going to talk about saviors. And saviors get frustrated because they become exasperated. You try to help, and there's no helping them because they repeat the same behaviors. Self-blamers turn over a new leaf a lot, over and again, trying to get it right, trying to get it right, trying to get it right. And this is awful, but it's true. They see God as a critical, perfectionist parent. How could God love me? I'm not worth loving. Well, let me tell you, that is absolutely not the truth. God does love you, every single one of you. I don't care what your background, I don't care what you have dealt with in your life, God loves you. God loves you so much that his son Jesus Christ died on a cross for you. This is not a myth. Jesus is a historic figure. He is not some myth made up in a storybook. Jesus is a historic figure. We have libraries that can back this up. Jesus is a historic figure. If you wrestle with who Jesus is or whether he could possibly love you, listen, I'd love to talk with you. We'll put on a pot of coffee or two or three, and we'll talk this out. But Jesus Christ died on a cross for you because he loves you. He is the Son of God. And he did that because he loves you. Jesus was being poked and prodded and asked a story. He said, Master, Rabbi, Teacher, what's the greatest commandment? And the response comes, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, with all your strength. He said, but here's the part I want you to hear. Y'all listen to me. The second is just as important. The first, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. But the second is just as important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as what? The scriptures bear that in black and white. You are worth loving because God did not create you to be abused. God did not create you to live a lifetime of I'm not good enough, that nobody can love me. God did not create you for that. God created you for a relationship with him and a relationship with each other. You are beloved. You are created in the image of God that makes you a holy people. In the Old Testament, we have the story. I'm almost done. Hang on. In the Old Testament, we have the story of Abram. His name was later changed to Abraham, but God stepped into Abram's life and said, I will be your God. You're going to be my people. He didn't give him a choice. He said, I love you. Poof, that's who you are. You're my people, and I'm going to be your God. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and we have the Apostle Peter, and this is after the resurrection. Jesus says to Peter, on this rock, Peter, on you, I'm going to build my church. Folks, guess who the church is? That's you. You are the people of God. God stepped into your lives 3,000 years ago and said, I will be your God. You will be my people. You are created in God's image. You are beloved of God. You are a holy people. You are worth everything in God's eyes. To the self-hater, to the one that just says in their spirit, in their heart, no, it can't be talking about me. Let me tell you, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. And here's your challenge, church. Every Sunday we do this. There's folks who are going to sprint for the door. I don't know if they're afraid that Bojangles is going to run out of chicken or what. I don't know. They're going to get out of here as quick as they can, but I pray that you'll do this. I want you to look into somebody's eyes today, and I want you to see them for who God created them to be, and I want you to know them by name. And if you don't know them, say, tell me your name. And I want you to look at them and know and tell them you're a child of God and you are worth the kingdom. You're God's people. And I thank God for you. Thanks be to God.